Welcome back to Classic Literature Free Audiobooks. If you missed previous chapters, you can find the full playlist in the description. Now, let the story continue with the Sea Wolf. Chapter 35. Next day, the mast steps clear and everything in readiness. We started to get the two topmasts aboard. The main topmast was over 30 feet in length, the foretopmast nearly 30, and it was of these that I intended making the shears. It was puzzling work. Fastening one end of a heavy tackle to the windlass, and with the other end fast to the butt of the foretopmast, I began to heave. Maud held the turn on the windlass and coiled down the slack. We were astonished at the ease with which the spar was lifted. It was an improved crank windlass, and the purchase it gave was enormous. Of course, what it gave us in power we paid for in distance. As many times as it doubled my strength, that many times was doubled the length of rope I heaved in. The tackle dragged heavily across the rail, increasing its drag as the spar arose more and more out of the water, and the exertion on the windlass grew severe. But when the butt of the topmast was level with the rail, everything came to a standstill. "I might have known it," I said impatiently. "Now we have to do it all over again." "Why not fasten the tackle part way down the mast?" Maud suggested. "It's what I should have done at first," I answered, hugely disgusted with myself. Slipping off a turn, I lowered the mast back into the water and fastened the tackle a third of the way down from the butt. In an hour, what of this and of rests between the heaving, I had hoisted it to the point where I could hoist no more. 8 feet of the butt was above the rail, and I was as far away as ever from getting the spar on board. I sat down and pondered the problem. It did not take long. I sprang jubilantly to my feet. "Now I have it," I cried. "I ought to make the tackle fast at the point of balance, and what we learn of this will serve us with everything else we have to hoist aboard." Once again, I undid all my work by lowering the mast into the water, but I miscalculated the point of balance, so that when I heaved, the top of the mast came up instead of the butt. Maud looked despair, but I laughed and said it would do just as well. Instructing her how to hold the turn and be ready to slack away at command, I laid hold of the mast with my hands and tried to balance it inboard across the rail. When I thought I had it, I cried to her to slack away, but the spar righted, despite my efforts, and dropped back toward the water. Again, I heaved it up to its old position, for I had now another idea. I remembered the watch tackle, a small double and single block affair, and fetched it. While I was rigging it between the top of the spar and the opposite rail, Wolf Larsen came on the scene. We exchanged nothing more than good mornings, and though he could not see, he sat on the rail out of the way and followed by the sound all that I did. Again, instructing Maud to slack away at the windlass when I gave the word, I proceeded to heave on the watch tackle. Slowly the mast swung in until it balanced at right angles across the rail, and then I discovered to my amazement that there was no need for Maud to slack away. In fact, the very opposite was necessary. Making the watch tackle fast, I hove on the windlass and brought in the mast, inch by inch, till its top tilted down to the deck, and finally its whole length lay on the deck. I looked at my watch. It was 12 o'clock. My back was aching sorely, and I felt extremely tired and hungry. And there on the deck was a single stick of timber to show for a whole morning's work. For the first time, I thoroughly realized the extent of the task before us. But I was learning. The afternoon would show far more accomplished. And it did, for we returned at 1 o'clock, rested and strengthened by a hearty dinner. In less than an hour, I had the main topmast on deck and was constructing the shears, lashing the two topmasts together and making allowance for their unequal length. At the point of intersection, I attached the double block of the main throat halyards. This, with the single block and the throat halyards themselves, gave me a hoisting tackle. To prevent the butts of the masts from slipping on the deck, I nailed down thick cleats. Everything in readiness, I made a line fast to the apex of the shears and carried it directly to the windlass. I was growing to have faith in that windlass, for it gave me power beyond all expectation. As usual, Maud held the turn while I heaved. The shears rose in the air. Then I discovered I had forgotten guy ropes. This necessitated my climbing the shears, which I did twice, before I finished guying it fore and aft and to either side. Twilight had set in by the time this was accomplished. Wolf Larsen, who had sat about and listened all afternoon and never opened his mouth, had taken himself off to the galley and started his supper. I felt quite stiff across the small of the back, so much so that I straightened up with an effort and with pain. I looked proudly at my work. It was beginning to show. I was wild with desire, like a child with a new toy, to hoist something with my shears. "I wish it weren't so late," I said. "I'd like to see how it works." "Don't be a glutton, Humphrey," Maud chided me. "Remember, tomorrow is coming, and you're so tired now that you can hardly stand." "And you," I said with sudden solicitude, "you must be very tired. You have worked hard and nobly. I am proud of you, Maud." "Not half so proud as I am of you, nor with half the reason," she answered, looking me straight in the eyes for a moment with an expression in her own and a dancing, tremulous light which I had not seen before and which gave me a pang of quick delight. I know not why, for I did not understand it. Then she dropped her eyes to lift them again, laughing. "If our friends could see us now," she said. "Look at us. Have you ever paused for a moment to consider our appearance?" "Yes, I have considered yours frequently," I answered, puzzling over what I had seen in her eyes and puzzled by her sudden change of subject. "Mercy," she cried. "And what do I look like, pray?" "A scarecrow, I'm afraid," I replied. "Just glance at your draggled skirts, for instance. Look at those three-cornered tears, and such a waist. It would not require a Sherlock Holmes to deduce that you have been cooking over a campfire, to say nothing of trying out seal blubber. And to cap it all, that cap, and all that is the woman who wrote, 'A Kiss Endured.' She made me an elaborate and stately courtesy and said, 'As for you, sir.' And yet, through the 5 minutes of banter which followed, there was a serious something underneath the fun which I could not but relate to the strange and fleeting expression I had caught in her eyes. What was it? Could it be that our eyes were speaking beyond the will of our speech? My eyes had spoken, I knew, until I had found the culprits out and silenced them. This had occurred several times, but had she seen the clamour in them and understood? And had her eyes so spoken to me? What else could that expression have meant? That dancing, tremulous light, and a something more which words could not describe. And yet it could not be. It was impossible. Besides, I was not skilled in the speech of eyes. I was only Humphrey van Weyden, a bookish fellow who loved. And to love, and to wait and win love, that surely was glorious enough for me. And thus I thought, even as we chaffed each other's appearance, until we arrived ashore and there were other things to think about. "It's a shame, after working hard all day, that we cannot have an uninterrupted night's sleep," I complained after supper. "But there can be no danger now. From a blind man?" she queried. "I shall never be able to trust him," I averred, "and far less now that he is blind. The liability is that his part helplessness will make him more malignant than ever. I know what I shall do tomorrow, the first thing. Run out a light anchor and kedge the schooner off the beach. And each night when we come ashore in the boat, Mr. Wolf Larsen will be left a prisoner on board. So this will be the last night we have to stand watch, and because of that it will go the easier." We were awake early and just finishing breakfast as daylight came. "Oh, Humphrey," I heard Maud cry in dismay and suddenly stop. I looked at her. She was gazing at the ghost. I followed her gaze but could see nothing unusual. She looked at me and I looked inquiry back. "The shears," she said, and her voice trembled. I had forgotten their existence. I looked again, but could not see them. "If he has," I muttered savagely. She put her hand sympathetically on mine and said, "You will have to begin over again." Oh, believe me, my anger means nothing. I could not hurt a fly. I smiled back bitterly. And the worst of it is, he knows it. You are right. If he has destroyed the shears, I shall do nothing except begin over again. But I'll stand my watch on board hereafter, I blurted out a moment later. And if he interferes, but I dare not stay ashore all night alone, Maud was saying when I came back to myself. It would be so much nicer if he would be friendly with us and help us. We could all live comfortably aboard. "We will," I asserted, still savagely, for the destruction of my beloved shears had hit me hard. "That is, you and I will live aboard, friendly or not, with Wolf Larsen." "It's childish," I laughed later, "for him to do such things, and for me to grow angry over them, for that matter." But my heart smote me when we climbed aboard and looked at the havoc he had done. The shears were gone altogether. The guys had been slashed right and left. The throat halyards which I had rigged were cut across through every part. And he knew I could not splice. A thought struck me. I ran to the windlass. It would not work. He had broken it. We looked at each other in consternation. Then I ran to the side. The masts, booms, and gaffs I had cleared were gone. He had found the lines which held them and cast them adrift. Tears were in Maud's eyes, and I do believe they were for me. I could have wept myself. Where now was our project of remasting the Ghost? He had done his work well. I sat down on the hatch combing and rested my chin on my hands in black despair. "He deserves to die," I cried out. "And God forgive me, I am not man enough to be his executioner." But Maud was by my side, passing her hand soothingly through my hair as though I were a child, and saying, "There, there, it will all come right. We are in the right, and it must come right." I remembered Michelet and leaned my head against her, and truly I became strong again. The blessed woman was an unfailing fount of power to me. What did it matter? Only a setback, a delay. The tide could not have carried the masts far to seaward, and there had been no wind. It meant merely more work to find them and tow them back. And besides, it was a lesson. I knew what to expect. He might have waited and destroyed our work more effectually when we had more accomplished. "Here he comes now," she whispered. I glanced up. He was strolling leisurely along the poop on the port side. "Take no notice of him," I whispered. "He's coming to see how we take it. Don't let him know that we know. We can deny him that satisfaction. Take off your shoes, that's right, and carry them in your hand." And then we played hide-and-seek with the blind man. As he came up the port side, we slipped past on the starboard, and from the poop we watched him turn and start aft on our track. He must have known, somehow, that we were on board, for he said "good morning" very confidently, and waited for the greeting to be returned. Then he strolled aft, and we slipped forward. "Oh, I know you're aboard," he called out, and I could see him listen intently after he had spoken. It reminded me of the great hoot owl, listening after its booming cry for the stir of its frightened prey. But we did not stir, and we moved only when he moved. And so we dodged about the deck, hand in hand, like a couple of children chased by a wicked ogre, till Wolf Larsen, evidently in disgust, left the deck for the cabin. There was glee in our eyes, and suppressed titters in our mouths, as we put on our shoes and clambered over the side into the boat. And as I looked into Maud's clear brown eyes, I forgot the evil he had done, and I knew only that I loved her, and that because of her the strength was mine to win our way back to the world. Next chapter, chapter 36. For 2 days Maud and I ranged the sea and explored the beaches in search of the missing masts. But it was not till the 3rd day that we found them, all of them, the shears included, and of all perilous places, in the pounding surf of the grim southwestern promontory. And how we worked! At the dark end of the first day, we returned, exhausted, to our little cove, towing the mainmast behind us. And we had been compelled to row, in a dead calm, practically every inch of the way. Another day of heartbreaking and dangerous toil saw us in camp with the two topmasts to the good. The day following I was desperate, and I rafted together the foremast, the fore and main booms, and the fore and main gaffs. The wind was favourable, and I had thought to tow them back under sail, but the wind baffled, then died away, and our progress with the oars was a snail's pace. And it was such dispiriting effort, to throw one's whole strength and weight on the oars, and to feel the boat checked in its forward lunge by the heavy drag behind, was not exactly exhilarating. Night began to fall, and to make matters worse, the wind sprang up ahead. Not only did all forward motion cease, but we began to drift back and out to sea. I struggled at the oars till I was played out. Poor Maud, whom I could never prevent from working to the limit of her strength, lay weakly back in the stern sheets. I could row no more. My bruised and swollen hands could no longer close on the oar handles. My wrists and arms ached intolerably, and though I had eaten heartily of a 12 o'clock lunch, I had worked so hard that I was faint from hunger. I pulled in the oars and bent forward to the line which held the tow, but Maud's hand leaped out restrainingly to mine. "What are you going to do?" she asked in a strained, tense voice. "Cast it off," I answered, slipping a turn of the rope, but her fingers closed on mine. "Please don't," she begged. "It is useless," I answered. "Here is night and the wind blowing us off the land." "But think, Humphrey, if we cannot sail away on the Ghost, we may remain for years on the island, for life even. If it has never been discovered all these years, it may never be discovered." "You forget the boat we found on the beach," I reminded her. "It was a seal-hunting boat," she replied, "and you know perfectly well that if the men had escaped they would have been back to make their fortunes from the rookery. You know they never escaped." I remained silent, undecided. "Besides," she added haltingly, "it's your idea, and I want to see you succeed." Now I could harden my heart. As soon as she put it on a flattering personal basis, generosity compelled me to deny her. Better years on the island than to die tonight, or tomorrow, or the next day in the open boat. We are not prepared to brave the sea. We have no food, no water, no blankets, nothing. Why, you'd not survive the night without blankets. I know how strong you are. You are shivering now. "It is only nervousness," she answered. "I am afraid you will cast off the masts in spite of me." "Oh, please, please, Humphrey, don't," she burst out a moment later. And so it ended, with the phrase she knew had all power over me. We shivered miserably throughout the night. Now and again I fitfully slept, but the pain of the cold always aroused me. How Maud could stand it was beyond me. I was too tired to thrash my arms about and warm myself, but I found strength time and again to chafe her hands and feet to restore the circulation. And still she pleaded with me not to cast off the masts. About 3 in the morning she was caught by a cold cramp, and after I had rubbed her out of that she became quite numb. I was frightened. I got out the oars and made her row, though she was so weak I thought she would faint at every stroke. Morning broke, and we looked long in the growing light for our island. At last it showed, small and black, on the horizon, fully 15 miles away. I scanned the sea with my glasses. Far away in the southwest, I could see a dark line on the water, which grew even as I looked at it. "Fair wind!" I cried in a husky voice I did not recognize as my own. Maud tried to reply, but could not speak. Her lips were blue with cold, and she was hollow-eyed. But oh, how bravely her brown eyes looked at me, how piteously brave. Again I fell to chafing her hands and to moving her arms up and down and about until she could thrash them herself. Then I compelled her to stand up, and though she would have fallen had I not supported her, I forced her to walk back and forth the several steps between the thwart and the stern sheets, and finally to spring up and down. "Oh, you brave, brave woman," I said, when I saw the life coming back into her face. "Did you know that you were brave?" "I never used to be," she answered. "I was never brave till I knew you. It is you who have made me brave." "Nor I until I knew you," I answered. She gave me a quick look, and again I caught that dancing, tremulous light and something more in her eyes. But it was only for the moment. Then she smiled. "It must have been the conditions," she said. But I knew she was wrong, and I wondered if she likewise knew. Then the wind came, fair and fresh, and the boat was soon labouring through a heavy sea toward the island. At 3:30 in the afternoon, we passed the southwestern promontory. Not only were we hungry, but we were now suffering from thirst. Our lips were dry and cracked, nor could we longer moisten them with our tongues. Then the wind slowly died down. By night it was dead calm, and I was toiling once more at the oars, but weakly, most weakly. At 2 in the morning, the boat's bow touched the beach of our own in a cove, and I staggered out to make the painter fast. Maud could not stand, nor had I strength to carry her. I fell in the sand with her, and when I had recovered, contented myself with putting my hands under her shoulders and dragging her up the beach to the hut. The next day we did no work. In fact, we slept till 3 in the afternoon, or at least I did, for I awoke to find Maud cooking dinner. Her power of recuperation was wonderful. There was something tenacious about that lily-frail body of hers, a clutch on existence which one could not reconcile with its patent weakness. "You know I was travelling to Japan for my health," she said, as we lingered at the fire after dinner and delighted in the movelessness of loafing. "I was not very strong, I never was. The doctors recommended a sea voyage, and I chose the longest." "You little knew what you were choosing," I laughed. "But I shall be a different woman for the experience, as well as a stronger woman," she answered, "and I hope a better woman. At least I shall understand a great deal more of life." Then, as the short day waned, we fell to discussing Wolf Larsen's blindness. It was inexplicable, and that it was grave. I instanced his statement that he intended to stay and die on Endeavour Island. When he, strong man that he was, loving life as he did, accepted his death, it was plain that he was troubled by something more than mere blindness. There had been his terrific headaches, and we were agreed that it was some sort of brain breakdown, and that in his attacks he endured pain beyond our comprehension. I noticed as we talked over his condition that Maud's sympathy went out to him more and more, yet I could not but love her for it, so sweetly womanly was it. Besides, there was no false sentiment about her feeling. She was agreed that the most rigorous treatment was necessary if we were to escape, though she recoiled at the suggestion that I might some time be compelled to take his life to save my own. "Our own," she put it. In the morning we had breakfast and were at work by daylight. I found a light kedge anchor in the forehold where such things were kept, and with a deal of exertion got it on deck and into the boat. With a long running line coiled down in the stem, I rowed well out into our little cove and dropped the anchor into the water. There was no wind, the tide was high, and the schooner floated. Casting off the shorelines, I kedged her out by main strength, the windlass being broken, till she rode nearly up and down to the small anchor, too small to hold her in any breeze. So I lowered the big starboard anchor, giving plenty of slack, and by afternoon I was at work on the windlass. 3 days I worked on that windlass. Least of all things was I a mechanic, and in that time I accomplished what an ordinary machinist would have done in as many hours. I had to learn my tools to begin with, and every simple mechanical principle which such a man would have at his finger ends I had likewise to learn. And at the end of 3 days I had a windlass which worked clumsily. It never gave the satisfaction the old windlass had given, but it worked and made my work possible. In half a day, I got the two topmasts aboard and the shears rigged and guyed as before. And that night I slept on board and on deck beside my work. Maud, who refused to stay alone ashore, slept in the forecastle. Wolf Larsen had sat about, listening to my repairing the windlass and talking with Maud and me upon indifferent subjects. No reference was made on either side to the destruction of the shears, nor did he say anything further about my leaving his ship alone. But still, I had feared him, blind and helpless and listening, always listening, and I never let his strong arms get within reach of me while I worked. On this night, sleeping under my beloved shears, I was aroused by his footsteps on the deck. It was a starlight night, and I could see the bulk of him dimly as he moved about. I rolled out of my blankets and crept noiselessly after him in my stocking feet. He had armed himself with a draw-knife from the tool locker, and with this he prepared to cut across the throat halyards I had again rigged to the shears. He felt the halyards with his hands and discovered that I had not made them fast. This would not do for a draw-knife, so he laid hold of the running part, hove taut, and made fast. Then he prepared to saw across with the draw-knife. "I wouldn't if I were you," I said quietly. He heard the click of my pistol and laughed. "Hello, Hump," he said. "I knew you were here all the time. You can't fool my ears." "That's a lie, Wolf Larsen," I said, just as quietly as before. "However, I am aching for a chance to kill you, so go ahead and cut." "You have the chance always," he sneered. "Go ahead and cut," I threatened ominously. "I'd rather disappoint you," he laughed and turned on his heel and went aft. "Something must be done, Humphrey," Maud said next morning when I had told her of the night's occurrence. "If he has liberty, he may do anything. He may sink the vessel or set fire to it. There is no telling what he may do. We must make him a prisoner." "But how?" I asked with a helpless shrug. "I dare not come within reach of his arms, and he knows that so long as his resistance is passive I cannot shoot him." "There must be some way," she contended. "Let me think." "There is one way," I said grimly. She waited. I picked up a seal club. "It won't kill him," I said, "and before he could recover I'd have him bound hard and fast." She shook her head with a shudder. "No, not that. There must be some less brutal way. Let us wait." But we did not have to wait long, and the problem solved itself. In the morning, after several trials, I found the point of balance in the foremast and attached my hoisting tackle a few feet above it. Maud held the turn on the windlass and coiled down while I heaved. Had the windlass been in order, it would not have been so difficult. As it was, I was compelled to apply all my weight and strength to every inch of the heaving. I had to rest frequently. In truth, my spells of resting were longer than those of working. Maud even contrived, at times when all my efforts could not budge the windlass, to hold the turn with one hand and with the other to throw the weight of her slim body to my assistance. At the end of an hour, the single and double blocks came together at the top of the shears. I could hoist no more, and yet the mast was not swung entirely inboard. The butt rested against the outside of the port rail, while the top of the mast overhung the water far beyond the starboard rail. My shears were too short. All my work had been for nothing, but I no longer despaired in the old way. I was acquiring more confidence in myself and more confidence in the possibilities of windlasses, shears, and hoisting tackles. There was a way in which it could be done, and it remained for me to find that way. While I was considering the problem, Wolf Larsen came on deck. We noticed something strange about him at once. The indecisiveness or feebleness of his movements was more pronounced. His walk was actually tottery as he came down the port side of the cabin. At the break of the poop he reeled, raised one hand to his eyes with the familiar brushing gesture, and fell down the steps, still on his feet, to the main deck, across which he staggered, falling and flinging out his arms for support. He regained his balance by the steerage companionway and stood there dizzily for a space, when he suddenly crumpled up and collapsed, his legs bending under him as he sank to the deck. "One of his attacks," I whispered to Maud. She nodded her head, and I could see sympathy warm in her eyes. We went up to him, but he seemed unconscious, breathing spasmodically. She took charge of him, lifting his head to keep the blood out of it and dispatching me to the cabin for a pillow. I also brought blankets and we made him comfortable. I took his pulse. It beat steadily and strong and was quite normal. This puzzled me. I became suspicious. "What if he should be feigning this?" I asked, still holding his wrist. Maud shook her head, and there was reproof in her eyes. But just then the wrist I held leaped from my hand, and the hand clasped like a steel trap about my wrist. I cried aloud in awful fear, a wild, inarticulate cry, and I caught one glimpse of his face, malignant and triumphant, as his other hand compassed my body, and I was drawn down to him in a terrible grip. My wrist was released, but his other arm, passed around my back, held both my arms so that I could not move. His free hand went to my throat, and in that moment I knew the bitterest foretaste of death earned by one's own idiocy. Why had I trusted myself within reach of those terrible arms? I could feel other hands at my throat. They were Maud's hands, striving vainly to tear loose the hand that was throttling me. She gave it up, and I heard her scream in a way that cut me to the soul, for it was a woman's scream of fear and heartbreaking despair. I had heard it before, during the sinking of the Martinez. My face was against his chest, and I could not see, but I heard Maud turn and run swiftly away along the deck. Everything was happening quickly. I had not yet had a glimmering of unconsciousness, and it seemed that an interminable period of time was lapsing before I heard her feet flying back. And just then, I felt the whole man sink under me. The breath was leaving his lungs, and his chest was collapsing under my weight. Whether it was merely the expelled breath, or his consciousness of his growing impotence, I know not, but his throat vibrated with a deep groan. The hand at my throat relaxed. I breathed. It fluttered and tightened again. But even his tremendous will could not overcome the dissolution that assailed it. That will of his was breaking down. He was fainting. Maud's footsteps were very near as his hand fluttered for the last time, and my throat was released. I rolled off and over to the deck on my back, gasping and blinking in the sunshine. Maud was pale but composed. My eyes had gone instantly to her face, and she was looking at me with mingled alarm and relief. A heavy seal club in her hand caught my eyes, and at that moment she followed my gaze down to it. The club dropped from her hand as though it had suddenly strung her, and at the same moment my heart surged with a great joy. Truly she was my woman, my mate woman, fighting with me, and for me as the mate of a caveman would have fought, all the primitive in her aroused, forgetful of her culture, hard under the softening civilization of the only life she had ever known. "Dear woman," I cried, scrambling to my feet. The next moment she was in my arms, weeping convulsively on my shoulder while I clasped her close. I looked down at the brown glory of her hair, glinting gems in the sunshine far more precious to me than those in the treasure chests of kings, and I bent my head and kissed her hair softly, so softly that she did not know. Then sober thought came to me. After all, she was only a woman, crying her relief now that the danger was past, in the arms of her protector or of the one who had been endangered. Had I been father or brother, the situation would have been in no wise different. Besides, time and place were not meet, and I wished to earn a better right to declare my love. So once again I softly kissed her hair as I felt her receding from my clasp. "It was a real attack this time," I said. "Another shock like the one that made him blind. He feigned at first, and in doing so brought it on." Maud was already rearranging his pillow. "No," I said. "Not yet. Now that I have him helpless, helpless he shall remain. From this day we live in the cabin. Wolf Larsen shall live in the steerage." I caught him under the shoulders and dragged him to the companionway. At my direction, Maud fetched a rope. Placing this under his shoulders, I balanced him across the threshold and lowered him down the steps to the floor. I could not lift him directly into a bunk, but with Maud's help, I lifted first his shoulders and head, then his body, balanced him across the edge, and rolled him into a lower bunk. But this was not to be all. I recollected the handcuffs in his stateroom, which he preferred to use on sailors instead of the ancient and clumsy ship irons. So, when we left him, he lay handcuffed hand and foot. For the first time in many days, I breathed freely. I felt strangely light as I came on deck, as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I felt also that Maud and I had drawn more closely together, and I wondered if she, too, felt it, as we walked along the deck side by side to where the stalled foremast hung in the shears. And that wraps up chapter 35. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Want to keep listening? Head over to the next chapter and let it play in the background while you relax or work. Links are in description. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you'll be notified when the next chapters are released. Thanks for listening.